Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here, and I'm sure the PowerPoint will come up at some moment. It's a pleasure because, and I have to say thank you when I start, because your bishop has served as the president of Global Ministries for 4 years, and she had a lot of responsibility. It was a time we had the big transition, moving from New York to Atlanta after 200 years. We had opened an office together in Argentina. We have been in many places together. We opened the office in Jerusalem together. So your bishop has very, very faithfully and with great leadership served the wider church as the president of Global Ministries, and you have shared her with the wider church. And I want to say thank you. And this theme of the conference, I'm not sure who came up with the theme, but it could be your theme. I mean, generosity in all places, that's what I have experienced with Bishop Ward when I traveled and in her leadership at Global Ministries. And I can only tell you, you are really blessed to have that Episcopal leader. And we really miss you at Global Ministries. But we kept her. She's our audit chair of our audit committee, but not only with generosity, also with accountability. I mean, audit, you need some generosity, but also accountability. And I also want to recognize our 3 church and community workers here, Shirley Townsend-Jones, and then we have Anna Schroy, and Gary is retired, but we still consider you one of us. So the 3 I want to recognize, they are our church and community workers. You are here, and do we have Anna somewhere? Okay, these are, you don't need, you can stand. Yeah, that's good. And then I also want to mention that Ismail, are you here? We have one director of the board of Global Ministries who is from North Carolina, Ismail Ruiz, and I don't see him, but he is your director. So thank you for sharing your people with us. My theme today is generosity in mission. Generosity in mission. I didn't do anything. Generosity in mission in a new mission age. We have a mission theology statement which we developed under Bishop Hope's leadership in our last quadrennium. And a key sentence there says, the Spirit is always moving to sweep the church into a new mission age. With openness and gratitude, we await the leading of the Spirit in ways not yet seen. And we are really entering and have entered a new mission age. To understand this clearly, we need to go a little bit back. So in the next slide, you will see that we have a long mission history as United Methodists. In 1819, the first missionary society was founded, and it was founded in New York, so in Manhattan. So that's why we had been for 200 years in New York. And the first missionary was John Stewart. John Stewart was an African American who went to be in mission among the Wyandot Native Americans in Ohio. Can you imagine how challenging this was in 1819, that the first ever missionary in our tradition was an African American and went to be in mission with Native Americans in Ohio? We crossed boundaries, we crossed cultures right there from the beginning. And then the first international missionaries went to Liberia. And normally I say they went in the 1830s to Liberia. But here I have to say the first missionary was pointed to Riley. He was actually from Maine, but he was a pastor in Riley when he went into mission service in Liberia. So this is our history of almost 200 years. Very important. If you can play the next slide, that helps. Okay, very important. The slide will come up. There was a missionary conference in 1910 in Edinburgh. And that was the key of the old age of mission. Because at that mission conference in 1910, in great generosity, I thought about your theme and how it works with what I want to say. There was a great generosity because all Protestant Christians came together. And they said, we want to win the world for Christ in this generation. There was a great optimism for mission. And John Watt, a Methodist layman, was one of the key speakers and leaders of this conference. And they went around and they were very generous. They said, the Presbyterians go to the north, the Baptists go to the west, the Baptists to the south, so we can reach everybody. And at the same time as it was a mission conference, it was the beginning of the ecumenical movement. Mission and ecumenism always walked very closely together. And then, when I show this picture, I always say it's a black and white photo. It's a black and white photo because it was black and white photos at that time. But it's also black and white because there were mainly white men in black suits who were there gathered for that mission conference. There were only a handful of people from the so-called young churches and very few women. But that what shaped the mission movement in those years. The white people had taken over. In another conference, the next slide, a few important years later, the same mission movement met in Ontario in Canada. They met in Ontario after 2 world wars. They met in Ontario after 2 world wars where so-called Christian nations had killed each other, had opted for nationalism over Christian sister and brotherhood, where the Christian nation, the country of Martin Luther, which is celebrating 500 years of Reformation this year, Germany, had created the Holocaust, had killed 6 million Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and sent them to concentration camps. And this was the country of Martin Luther. The optimism of 1910, we Western nations will win the world for Christ in 1 generation. This optimism had faded. There were much more doubts. But there was also strength from the churches in the South. And they said, we need partnership in mission. This was the first time this word came up. And partnership not as a business contract, but partnership in obedience to God. We together want to do God's will and engage in God's mission in this world. And this was then, and a year later, in the next slide, there was this important conference in Villingen in Germany which created the term Missio Dei, God's mission. And this is a whole theology behind it. I want to make it very short, and that's why I brought these 2 quotes here. It got even stronger that they said, it's not our mission. It is God's mission. It's the Missio Dei. And the former Archbishop of Canterbury has said this very brilliantly, I think. He said, mission is finding out what God is doing and joining in. Mission is finding out what God is doing and joining in. And a German theologian, I never found out who did it, but it wasn't me, but somebody, said, mission is trying to grasp the hem of God's coat while God is walking through the world. Grasping God's coat while he is walking through this world. It completely changes the understanding of mission. We realize that God is already at work. We Methodists call that prevenient grace. God is already there when we go and is already at work. And we need to work hard to discover where God is at work so we are able to join in and become parts of God's mission in this world. It is tremendously humbling because it's not about us. It's not about global ministry. It's not about the United Methodist Church. It's about God's mission in this world and where Jesus is walking through this world. But it's also so encouraging because we are invited to be participants in God's mission in this world. At the last World Council of Churches meeting in Korea, we accepted a declaration on mission which makes this even stronger, takes it even further into the new mission age. This was a declaration which is called Together Towards Life, which was created by a commission of the World Council of Churches, of the Lausanne movement, which is more the evangelical side of the church, of the Vatican, and the World Alliance of Pentecostal Churches. And they came together with a strong presence from the South. And one of the key sentences you find here, you find on the screen sometime, where they basically say that mission now is mission from the margins. We are turning around where the mission comes from. We have just sang, we have a story to hear from the nations. Our pride will be turned upside down. It is really that mission is coming from the margins. Mission is coming not only from the powerful to the powerless, but it is turning around. So we have a mission movement where, as we say at Global Ministries now, mission is truly from everywhere to everywhere, trying to join in where God is at work in this world. This has been followed. There was a practice, there was a reality about this, and you can see that in the next slide, where you see the shift of the center of Christian gravity. A shift in the center of Christian gravity. You see here, of course, Christianity started with Jesus in Jerusalem, and it grew into a world church and moved more and more to the West, especially through the church in Latin America, the Conquista, and then also North America. But now we observe a move of the church to the south and to the east. The center of the church is really changing. So this is not just theology which I describe. This is also reality. This is practice of the church in the 21st century. An example you can see here in the next slide is about numbers. By 2050, and the bluer, the darker blue, the more Christians live in these countries. But by 2050, 1 of every 4 Christians will live in sub-Saharan Africa. 1 in every 4 Christians, 25% of all Christians in the world will live in the southern part, south of the Sahara Desert. And China, I mean, it's a very big country anyway, but still, China will be the 3rd largest Christian population now, and in 2050, the largest Christian nation in the world. Who would have said this just 30, 40, 50 years ago? There's a tremendous growth of the church in China. We experience that was not only a theology, but it has become a reality. That the church really is strong and thriving in many parts of the world. And we need to be ready to also to receive and to recognize the growth and the strength of the church. A few weeks ago, we had the visit of the China Christian Council leadership. You see here some of those leaders. And Bishop Hope will remember our visit some years ago together to China. The church in China, as I said, will be the largest Christian nation, the largest church. They have about 40 million members now in registered, unregistered churches. And when they came to the U.S., because we have a long-term relationship with them, they made an effort to come to Atlanta. They thought we were still in New York, and they had not prepared to come to Atlanta. And I said, come to Atlanta. And they spent a whole day with us, and we felt very honored for their coming. And the president of the China Christian Council, which has all Protestant churches under it. There are churches from the Adventist tradition, from the Methodist tradition, from the Baptist tradition. I always wonder how they do it, how they keep this together. That's much worse than the United Methodist Church to stay together, because they have all these long traditions of Baptist and Adventist, and some want to worship on Saturday, others worship on Sunday, but they are together because that happened during the Chinese Revolution. And now they are proud to be the first post-denominational church. And they are growing, and they are starting new churches. Every year they have 500,000 baptisms in China, 500,000 baptisms. But they only have 1,600 ordained pastors. 6,000 ordained pastors for 40 million Christians. This means we would have about 800 pastors in the United States. How many you have in North Carolina? 200 something ordained elder? I don't know. How many ordained elder? Board of the Ordained Ministries, president? Okay, maybe 200. Let's say 200. So you imagine, for 40 million Christians, only 6,000 ordained elder in China. So it is very important, and that is one of our emphasis. Training, theological training, the theological seminars, Nanjing and many other places. But it is a growing church. It's a growing church, and 1/3 of the members are under 30. 1/3 of the members are under 30. Wonderful news. And we have to live up in the way we do mission to this reality and to the changed theology of mission in this world. So at Global Ministries, you can see in this map that we now have, as we say, and Bishop Hope already quoted, mission from everywhere to everywhere. And this map, I already used it in the workshop this morning, is not that we got some sponsorship from Delta now that we are in Atlanta and now we have to show their flight map. It is rather where our missionaries come from and where they go to. They are no longer just from the United States. Of course, there are missionaries from the United States going to Africa, as 200 years ago. But now missionaries are, as we say, from everywhere to everywhere. So you could have a missionary going from Brazil to work with migrants in Switzerland. We have a new church start, a new United Methodist Church in the Central African Republic, a country which is torn by civil war, strife between Muslims and Christians. And 2 young pastors from there had been trained in the Congo, are going back and are led by a missionary from Ivory Coast. We have a missionary from the Philippines serving in Taiwan with seafarers, Filipino seafarers in the migrant community. Missionaries from everywhere to everywhere. A good example happened at General Conference. You see, in the next picture, you see Bishop Yambasu, who is the vice president of our board, and that was a commissioning service at General Conference in Portland. Bishop Yambasu commissions the missionary from Ivory Coast, Sanju, to serve in the Central African Republic. Behind them is Judy Chung, Korean-American, leading our missionary services. And on the right, this is just by chance, is Eden Fletcher. He is a British missionary with Global Ministries from the British Methodists serving in Vietnam. So mission truly is from everywhere to everywhere. And also at Global Ministries, we have tried in our work to express this in the way we are staffing our work. Our missionaries now are, as I said, from everywhere to everywhere, but also our staff. In New York, in Atlanta, sorry, it's a year, it happens. In Atlanta, in our office, we have people from over 30 countries working there. In the Africa office, they are all Africans. Asia office are Asians. It is this whole coming together of different cultures. In our cabinet, there are so many continents represented. Not always easy. There are different leadership styles. The Americans wanted to introduce Casual Friday. And I said, okay, brings us to cabinet. I knew the Africans and Asians on the cabinet would not agree. So I didn't have to say anything. After 5 minutes, that proposal was dead. Because culturally, that was not appropriate if a bishop came from Africa, and they were very clear, we don't want this. So it has to do with even day-to-day operations and management, but it is exciting to show that the body of Christ is more than one nation, one culture, and we are in this together. Here are some of these numbers. The next is a video I want to show, which gives you a short glimpse of where we are at Global Ministries at this moment.
The Spirit is always moving to sweep the church into a new mission age. After nearly 200 years in New York City, Global Ministries, the mission and development agency of the United Methodist Church, has relocated its U.S. headquarters to Atlanta, Georgia. Global Ministries' move to Atlanta was born out of a strategic plan to reduce operational costs, improve stewardship of church resources, and to deepen connections to annual conferences locally and globally. Our goal is to serve the church more effectively in this new mission age. One way this is evident is through the creation of regional offices, where Global Ministries staff will now be directly accessible to churches and the communities in which they work. Over the past 3 decades, Global Ministries has engaged in new or renewed mission in Africa, Asia, Eurasia, and Latin America, activating the formation of more than 990 faith communities. In addition, today, 350 missionaries serve in more than 60 countries around the world. Being from everywhere to everywhere creates unique opportunities for shared learning experiences with communities and the local and global church. Global Ministries has also created a Center for Mission Innovation to deepen our support for annual conferences and the local church. CMI will explore ways the Spirit is forming new innovations in mission and seeks to share those learnings across the church. Another facet of the Spirit's move to sweep the church into a new mission age is the UMC's commitment to improving health and wholeness for all people, both in the church and communities around the world. Seeking to improve health and wholeness for all people, Global Ministries continues to respond to the needs of those who are most vulnerable through the United Methodist Committee on Relief. UMCOR now continues its 75-year commitment to alleviate suffering through disaster response and recovery. Disasters UMCOR has responded to include flood recovery in Louisiana and Texas, tornado recovery in Virginia and Mozambique, the Ebola crisis in West Africa, and the Nepal earthquake. Your generous financial support through the advance makes Global Ministries' work around the world possible. This is just the beginning of Global Ministries' story in our new mission age. To learn more about the Spirit's surprising activity, visit umcmission.org.
After the annual conference season, this video is available for use in the churches. You can download it also from our website. I want to mention the United Methodist Committee on Relief very specifically before I move to another topic. The United Methodist Committee on Relief was founded, as we heard, in 1940, more than 75 years ago. And it's active, as you well know, here after your floods in North Carolina and the United States and globally, internationally. What I think is very special about it, it was founded in 1940 in the middle of the Second World War. And Bishop Walsh, who was the bishop who called for a special appeal, did not ask for more weapons or more arms in 1940. What he did, he was asking for help and solidarity with the refugees in Europe. I, as a German, feel very grateful for this solidarity of the sisters and brothers in the United States in a time when we were enemies. But they reached out. What a Christian testimony at that time. What a counterculture act of the Methodists of the 1940s. And as Global Ministries and UMCOR, we continue this work. And I will say a bit more about migration later. But I also want to say that for me it is very important that in our tradition, in our Wesleyan tradition, where we keep works of piety and works of mercy together, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, our development, our disaster arm, is part of Global Ministries. We respect everybody's creed and color and help without looking at the color and the creed of people in a disaster situation. But it is housed in Global Ministries, where we also start churches, where we evangelize, where we bring Jesus. Because this is all what we are, both in our Wesleyan tradition. So we are one of the very few, probably the only one, that has mission and development in the same organization. The Anglicans have Episcopal Relief, the Lutheran World Service, ADRA for the Adventists, and we have clearly said, no, this belongs together. That is our tradition. So that is an important part of who we are as Global Ministries. Let me talk a bit more about migration. Migration is one of the biggest crises of our world today, and we never had as many people having to move because of conflict or disaster, natural disasters, than now. 65.3 million people are on the move worldwide. 21 million are recognized as refugees, recognized by the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. But 65 million people are on the move. It's a big crisis. And you can see here in the next slide how many of these people are being received. And we're talking about generosity. How many of these people are being received very generously by countries that are extremely poor and we would call underdeveloped economically? Jordan received 664,000. Ethiopia, 736. Iran, almost 1 million people. Pakistan, 1.6. Turkey, over 2 million refugees received and settled in these countries. An extreme generosity of countries that have far less than us. And I can't help it to say that 50,000 or 100,000 is not a number which is right for a country that has the resources like the United States. And it's not a political statement. It's a simple being faithful to who we are as Methodists, as Christians, and seeing the reality of life and the crisis in this world. But I don't want to talk too much about the crisis today. I want to show and share with you how migration has become a blessing. And this is something which has happened from the beginning of the church. Dana Robert, professor for mission theology at Boston University and one of the great Methodist mission theologians, he wrote a book about Christian mission, how Christianity became a world religion. And there she argues very interestingly that it was because very early on, people like Paul were bicultural. They knew two cultures, and they were able to cross cultures. And that's why Christianity grew so fast into a world religion. The good news, as she says here, were the human bridges across which the good news of Jesus traveled from one culture to the other. This has been the history of the Christian church. Migrants have been the carrier of the good news. And we are experiencing this again in the 21st century. The next slide, you see a few pictures from Vietnam. And you know that your bishop is a bishop assigned by the Council of Bishops to serve as the bishop for our mission initiative in Vietnam. We have a fast-growing church, United Methodist Church, which over 100 churches now in Vietnam. None of these churches yet registered. We are working hard on registration. That's not easy with the Vietnamese government, but the church is thriving anyway. And here you see some pictures of house churches, very few buildings, most of them are house churches where people come together, you see, in a living room and share their faith, read the Bible, and worship together. And this church was started by Vietnamese refugees, people who came as boat people in the 70s to the United States, were received as refugees by United Methodist churches, and then were found by Christ, and they found the United Methodist Church. And then as Christians said, we need to go back to our people. We need to share the good news we have found in the United States and share it. And that's how the church in Vietnam was started. Migration as a blessing. As a German, for me, this is very special because the German Methodist Church would not exist if it had not been for these Otterbein and Albrechts and all these people who were immigrants to the United States and then wanted to go back literally to their sisters and brothers to share the good news. And that's how the church started in Germany. And just in April, I was at a very unlikely place to see where migration is making a difference. Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And I was invited to speak and preach at the 10th anniversary of the first United Methodist Church, Dubai. I'm not sure you have heard about it. It's a church which was started by Filipino migrants who live and work in the United Arab Emirates. And they have already not started only one church, they have started several churches. They meet in hotel rooms, and if they are not allowed to continue, they move to the next hotel that gives them space. And the church is growing. They reach people from all nations and have started this church and lived there for 10 years now. And on the left here, this is the Anglican church in Sharjah, another of these Emirates. There are 7 of them, St. Martin's Episcopal Church. And in that church, every week, more than 200 Christian communities are meeting. And they have a very tight schedule. You only get a table, and that's basically all. And you bring your own equipment, you bring your own cross, because some are Orthodox, some are Methodist, some are Pentecostal. And they have been charged by the ruler there to facilitate Christian worship. That's what the Anglican priest told me. And we have a place there, but we also meet in hotels. It's an energy, it's an opportunity. And you can say that maybe some of these Arab families, Muslim families, the Filipino maid who is a Christian, maybe the only Christian they ever meet in their life. And she has an opportunity to pray for that child and make Christ known in the situation. We would never be able to go as a United Methodist mission from the US or anywhere. So migration can be a blessing. And I want to show you a few, this is just a video from my cell phone, but it gives you an idea of the energy and the family spirit of that church. migration as a blessing. The last slide on this one shows, and I could make a little quiz here, where these people are and where they are worshiping. Look at the slides carefully. There are 4 scenes depicted. And one is in Ireland, one is in Kyrgyzstan, and 2 are in Germany. And now you tell me which is which. It will be difficult. On the top left, it's a youth camp in Kyrgyzstan. And young Christians from Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkey coming together at this youth camp of the United Methodist Church in Eurasia, praising God, worshiping together. And on the right, top right, it's a Sunday school in Ireland, in the Methodist Church in Ireland. The church in Europe has been transformed, has been revitalized by the many migrants that have come to Europe. New churches have been started. The Methodist Church in Italy, who was almost dying, has been revived. And even the Italians feel revived and are coming back to church because they see new life and young people in their churches. And this is a church in Ireland, which had sent missionaries for centuries from St. Patrick and many others, and now is receiving these migrants as new missionaries from the margin, renewing the church. And at the bottom you see 2 pictures from a seminary Global Ministries sponsors every year in Germany, in Stuttgart, where we bring leaders from migrant churches from all over Europe together and to train them for a week and give them an opportunity to share their experience out of these growing migrant churches. And on the left is one of our Arab-speaking churches now, which are mushrooming in Germany. I don't know how many. It's every day we have more Arab-speaking Methodist churches in Germany through the large number of refugees, over 1 million that have come from Syria and moved into Germany and had been received in Germany. And they have posed a great question to us. Who are we as Christians? What does it mean to be Christians in Germany? We had got so used to it. And our Muslim people who come challenge us to say and to be more clear what it is and what it means to be a Christian. And at the same time, quite a few of them have found Christ and have joined also the United Methodist Church. That has been a very powerful experience in Europe over the last 10, 15 years, but especially in these last years when we had this large number of refugees joining us. Before I move to my final piece, that is really about sharing from my heart an experience about generosity I had. As Bishop Holt said, my wife and I, and 2 of our children were born there. We served for 8 years as missionaries in Brazil. I had the opportunity there in Brazil to teach at our Methodist Theological School, but also 2 days a week I was allowed to work with Catholic nuns who had started a homeless ministry and moved into the center of São Paulo. São Paulo is this huge metropolis, 20 million, you never know how many people live there. And in the center there are hundreds and hundreds of homeless people who live from the trash they can find and try to survive in the streets of São Paulo. And every week we had a soup kitchen. Only that soup kitchen was very different from any soup kitchen I know anywhere. And that was a soup kitchen where we came together and all prepared the soup together. It was not the volunteers bringing the soup, but there was a street market. And after the street market, we all went there, people, homeless people, the volunteers, and we negotiated with the people there, the vendors. Some fish head, because they sold the fillet but not the head, and it made a good fish soup. Or we got vegetables they were not able to sell because it didn't look good. So we negotiated there, and it was always more difficult for me than for the people in the street because I was not used to begging. So I felt very awkward and tried to not do it, But that was the idea, that we did it together. And then even the firewood came from the boxes people had carried to take the vegetables to the market. And then we did the fire on an open fire in a big pot. And basically just the salt and the oil came from the volunteers. And it was a tremendous experience of generosity because everybody contributed. And to see sometimes somebody from the street bringing some salt and the pride to be able to share. And all of us were sharing and all of us were receiving, and all of us were giving and contributing. And after we had served, we then came together for a time of worship, also under the bridge in the center of São Paulo. And just a few weeks ago, I found a very old video which describes exactly what we did at that time. And I wanted to share this with you because it gives you a feeling how we find generosity in the most unexpected places. And let me end with this little story of generosity I experienced right there under the bridge. We had somebody living under the bridge. Her name was Zenira, and you see her in this picture. Zenira was living in the streets for many, many years already. She was, as we called them, the sofredor de rua, one of those who suffered in the street, who lived there. But she was, in spite of her shortcomings, she was a very spiritual person. She was really the one who kept us together, who always prayed when we had the worship service. And one day, and I think that is a generosity which really I never forgotten, and when I thought about this generosity theme, it came to my mind. One day she came to me and she said, "Thomas, I have a rose for you." And it's actually this rose which I have here in my hand. She had this rose for me, and she said, "I found this rose in the trash here, while I was looking for something to eat, something to sell in the trash here in the streets in São Paulo. And I found this rose, and I want to give it to you. I want to give it to you because as long as we can find a rose in the trash, there's hope. As long as we can find a rose in the trash, there's hope." So sometimes we have to listen carefully. We have to look carefully, and we see how God is at work in every place, and there's generosity in the most unexpected places. As long as we find a rose in the trash, there's hope. Thank you.